to a video run through of how to answer some of the bigger mark questions for the anatomy paper, specifically the analysing a sporting movement questions, which can be found in the back of the paper. So when you open it up, scan to the back, looking at questions kind of 11, 12, 13, that kind of area, you'll see some specific questions that will pop up. They're all linked to analysing those sporting movements. Now, there are two types of questions at the back that are worth an awful lot of marks, right? So you can't really afford to get these wrong. So make sure you're paying attention. If you've got a pen and paper with you as well, strongly recommend taking a few notes on how to answer these type of questions. There's two types linked to the sporting movements. The first one is just the skeletal system or the skeleton on its own linked to movement. And the second one, which is with more marks, is the skeleton and the muscular system combined. So let's just start with the skeleton question on its own for the time being. So let's have a look at what it looks like. Okay, so you'll be given a figure or an image, as you can see at the top of the screen here. It's kind of a row movement taking place. They'll call it phases of movement. So as you can see on the screen here, you've got preparation phase through to execution phase. All right, and then underneath you'll see it says analyze. So that's the command word. How the axial and appendicular skeleton, the skeleton, allows the movement necessary at, and it will give you certain body parts to consider. In this case, it's asked for the shoulder, the elbow, and the trunk. Sometimes it's a bit more specific than that. It will ask you for the right shoulder, the left elbow, and then the trunk, perhaps. In this case, each of those sections, the shoulder and the elbow, for example, are doing the same movement on either side, so there's no need for the right or the left. Right? And underneath it says then for the athlete to move from the preparation phase to the execution phase. So if you see analyze how the axial and appendicular skeleton come together, you're just talking about bones and joints. You'd be wasting your time talking about muscles with this question. How's the best way to attack this question? Well, let's have a look first of all from people who's going to be marking it, point of view. What are they looking for and what do they want? All right, so 8 marks up for grabs. Let's have a look at what they want. So underneath, if you have a scan, it says learners are expected to provide answers in line with the information in the tables. What table are you thinking? Right, okay, so it's up to you to draw the table, which we'll talk through in a second. Right, then you're asked to talk about something called interrelationships. Need to be provided with an analysis of the system. Again, we'll elaborate on that in a second. And lastly, ask any additional information that demonstrates the knowledge of how the movement is taking place, giving an indication of a deeper understanding is required. So if we have a look, and we start with the first section of the table above. So you're going to need to draw this table out on the paper, ideally. If you feel like you haven't got room, then a separate piece of paper. But I would do it on the paper would be my suggestion, because they will look at it and then potentially mark it maybe as well. So you're going to put joint in the left-hand column, first column, and you're going to pick the areas that they've asked you for. Then you're going to need to put the type of joint is the first column. So if we have a look, in this case, we've got ball and socket, hinge, and then gliding or cartilaginous for the trunk. And then after that, we have got the bones that meet or are articulating at that joint. So again, the answer's there in that column. And then the type of movement that's being produced by the skeleton. So in this case, it's extension, skeleton's extending, flexing, or no movement in the case of the trunk, or slight extension because there'll be a slight arch in the back. And the last one is the plane of movement. In this case, it's being sagittal, which separates the left and the right sides. But if you have a look underneath and delve a little deeper, there's 3 specific things that they're looking for. First one is the table. Okay, if you don't draw the table to help you structure the answer, then you're going to lose marks. It's that simple. All right, so please make sure that you draw this table out. Then you populate the table as quickly as you can, as accurately as you can. And then you start kind of writing out your analysis. When you start looking at your analysis, it says something called interrelationships are provided. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. And last but not least, it says any additional information. All right, so we can say there's 3 key things really that they're looking for Table, interrelationships, and additional information. In simple terms, the table is what it is. Okay, you need to draw those columns, you need to try and fill it in with the accurate information, and then you're going to use that information to answer the question. When it says interrelationships, that's about linking it all together, right? So you take each aspect and then you link it together using conjunctions or words that like sew or thread your train of thought together. So for example, bones meeting at the joint are A, B, and C. They allow the movement to occur, which is this. This happens because this leads to, therefore, are all examples of how you can link things together. And last but not least, additional information is anything you think might gain you a few extra marks, which we'll get to in a second. Okay, so if we have a look at how we can analyze and break it down from a marking point of view. So again, those are some of the key things that you might be looking for in the shoulder. So again, things like the word although, a great range of movement is possible at the shoulder due to the shape made by the bones. The movement is extension as the arm has moved behind the anatomical position. So you got words like although the movement is da da da, this has allowed the arm to move. Again, you need to just link some of the sentences together to make sure that you're getting the analysis across. If you use the elbow as another example. So you can see the athlete's elbow is in a flexion as the joint angle has decreased. Yeah, so again, see, elbow is flexion as the joint angle has decreased to allow a bend in the arm. It's just kind of really about thinking about how you can link what you're saying together in a nice flowing start. Last but not least with the trunk. If you have a look, flexion, extension, and some rotation is permitted at the joints in the trunk. In this case, we can see there's some slight extension or very little movement occurring in the trunk. Okay. So again, just some things that you could mention there. Something you could consider things with additional information are things like joints and the structure of the joints. So in the middle here, we can see that unlike other synovial joints, there's limited movement available, right, to help limit injury in the back. Key additional information is anything you think might be worth extra points or something that's worth mentioning. So if we have a look, so things like additional factors could be things like the shape of the joint, ligaments holding things together, certain bones that are coming together that you think are worth mentioning. They may not be the main bones, but maybe there's additional bones you could mention. So for example, if we were talking about the wrist or the lower arm, you might talk about the radius and the ulnar, and then you might actually talk about the bones in the wrist being the radial ulnar and things like that. They're helping support the movement. Second big marker that you get back is basically very similar to the skeletal one. However, you're basically literally just adding the meat to the bones. So when we talk about a movement, it's not just the skeleton now, we need to talk about the muscles that are involved as well. How to spot this question. So if we have a look, it can look very similar on face value to just the skeleton question. But if you hone in and focus your eyes on the actual question itself, it says analyze the required movement at, in this case, it's the ankle, elbow, and wrist. If it doesn't specifically say skeleton, it's asking you for the skeleton and the muscles. All right, so if it just says the required movement, it means bones and muscles. Another indicator that it means bones and muscles is the marks that are available as well. So if it's more marks, if it looks at, oh, that's quite a lot of marks, and it says just the required movement, it wants the bones and the muscles. So your table in this case, okay, if you have a look, we'll have the type of joint, bones, the movement taking place, and the plane of movement. Okay, exactly the same as the skeleton question. This time, all you're adding to your analysis are the muscles that are being used, specifically the agonist and antagonist. Stay away from synergists and fixators, just the agonist and the antagonist. And then last but not least, the type of muscular contraction that's occurring. So is something shortening? In that case, it's concentric. If it's lengthening, it's eccentric. If it's being held, it's isometric. So just make sure that you get that muscle contraction on the end as well. So in this case, it asks you for the ankle, the elbow, and the wrist. Okay. You'll also notice if you've got keen eyes, that with the plane of movement and the muscular contraction on the end, if you're in doubt or you're not sure, okay, sagittal is a pretty good go for in terms of plane of movement. A lot of sporting movements are split between the left and the right hand side. And the muscular contraction, if you're really not sure whether it's kind of, lengthening, shortening, or staying still, not sure at all there, a good bet, a safe bet would be just to go for concentric. You're better off putting something in there rather than leaving it blank. Okay. The analysis then is going to look very, very similar. All right, you literally go through it step by step. Again, piece by piece, talk about the bones, then you talk about the joint that's being used, then you talk about the movement. In this case, with the ankle, it was plantar flexion. Then you talk about how the muscles are helping to produce that movement. So what's shortening, what's lengthening in terms of the agonist and the antagonist to help produce that movement. Something's contracting, something's relaxing. And then last but not least, okay, any key information that you think is going to be important, and also make sure that you refer to the plane of movement and the type of muscular contraction. Again, very similar for the elbow. If we scan our eyes over, we can see the elbow is a hinge joint. Movement is only possible in one plane, which is sagittal, because it can only go up and down 90 degrees. So it has to be left or right side. And if we scan our eyes along, you can see the triceps contract, they're shortening. So again, that tells us what's moving where. Take it piece by piece, right? Top suggestion, top tip, use subheadings in your analysis answers. If you're going to start talking about the elbow, put elbow and underline it, and then start analyzing and telling me how the elbow is producing that movement. Same with wrist, underline. Right? The bones that meet at the wrist are the radius and ulnar and carpals. Wrist is a condyloid joint. Right? Movement occurring in the sagittal plane. Type of movement we can see in this case is flexion. The flexion can occur because, and then you start kind of showing off and saying how you know that it's flexion. So for in this case, if it's wrist flexion, the wrist extensors must be relaxing. These are the antagonist muscles. Show off a little bit. In essence, that is how you answer those bigger mark analyze sporting movement style questions. Okay, a lot of marks up for grabs. If you just had 2 of those at the back of your paper, one of them was a 12 marker, bones and muscles, and you had an 8 marker that was just the skeleton, that's 20 marks. So out of 60 marks, so you could have a third of your whole paper just on 2 questions alone. You cannot afford to bomb that. My advice is please practice, 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 practice. You've got the revision guides, the revision question books, Seesaw, you've got a ton of tasks, and also check any handouts or things that we have used in class as well to help support you with these bigger marker questions. If you get stuck at all or you feel like you're really struggling with this, please email me, let me know. I can arrange some one-to-one time with you. We can sit down, we can go through it and iron out where you might be struggling. If not, you're going to smash this exam. You're going to smash these questions. You're going to get all the marks you can, and let's go for those high grades.